Can the Lebanese really scrap the status quo? What started as a revolt against a quickly aborted tax on WhatsApp communications quickly mushroomed into a movement that's brought the entire nation to a standstill for 2 weeks. It's been long coming, the simmering frustration over corruption, mismanagement, and a divvying up of portfolios among the rival factions born of the civil war that ended in 1990 in Lebanon. The biggest scalp to date coming Tuesday when the Saudi and Western-backed Prime Minister Saad Hariri tendering his resignation as Prime Minister in a power-sharing government. But that's not enough, says a younger generation whose rallying cry has been Kulen Yali Kulen. All of them means all of them. Not so easy in a country that's a patchwork of rival clans and confessions, where all the sides are armed and all enjoy support from outside patrons. The largest, Iran-backed Hezbollah. What's its next move? Is the country ripe for reform and an end to its institutionalized sectarian divide, or for a return to civil war, as some even fear? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at the Lebanon protests. Joining us, activist Anthony Khoury, member of, I know I'm going to get this wrong, Anthony, Muwatinun wa Muwatinat fi Dawla. How's that?
Very true.
Or how do you translate that?
Citizen in a state.
Citizens in a state, okay. Thanks for being with us. Thanks as well to Rima Tarabai, former advisor to late Lebanese leader Rafik Hariri. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
In the Lebanese capital, we are joined by Member of Parliament Ana Aoun of the Free Patriotic Movement of Lebanese president, and your nephew, Michel Aoun. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And also in the Lebanese capital, we're going to be joined by Nadim Houri, Executive Director of the Arab Reform Initiative, the France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate, with the army clearing roadblocks and banks preparing, they say, for a Friday reopening. Lebanon seems to be catching its breath after 2 weeks, but its leaderless movement remains more than ever determined. Tuesday evening, in the northern Sunni stronghold of Tripoli, there seemed to be no love lost for Saad Hariri or for any of the other familiar faces in Lebanese politics. Same story over in the capital.
We are still here and we are still ready. We will give the government a small period of time in order for them to form a downsized government and make the changes we've asked for.
We will give them 48 hours only to form a government, and if our demands are not met, we are still here and the streets are still here.
Before we go to our panel, let's go to Beirut. Leila Malana Allen is our correspondent. Leila, you heard that activist saying we give the politicians 48 hours to form a government. We've had the resignation of Saad Hariri. What's next?
Yes, quite. So we had that resignation yesterday, but of course it's not formal until it's accepted by President Michel Aoun. And he said today that he would like Saad Hariri to stay on in charge of a caretaker government until a new government can be formed. Now, as the protesters are saying, they're giving them a 48-hour deadline until Friday, when they say that they will be back on the streets, blocking the roads again, if that doesn't happen. This is quite the challenge for the government. With the current parliament, for them to try and nominate a new prime minister who they all agree on and a new cabinet seems almost impossible given the months that it took to form a government after the last election. So they are all under great strain. There are also some particular characters who the protesters are very angry about that seem determined not to leave. And one of those, perhaps the most important, is Gebran Bassil. He is the foreign minister. And the problem is that he is the son-in-law of President Michel Aoun. And he, thus far in negotiations, has absolutely refused to consider a new cabinet that does not include Bassil. Protesters saying he absolutely must go. Now, as you said, the mood here today is slightly calmer. There does seem to be a slight pause and the roads were cleared this morning, but that's not unanimous. Overnight, there were huge debates among protesters as to whether they were going to agree to that or not. And this morning, the army did have to impose deadlines in some places and physically push protesters back in some areas where they needed to. And through the day, we saw quieter areas in the centres of towns that have been the subject of huge protests. But as we move into the evening, although here in downtown Beirut, as you can see behind me, it's a little bit calmer. People are still here, but they aren't actively protesting. That is not the case in the rest of the country. And that has been the huge difference with these particular protests here over the last 2 weeks, is that they have been across the country.
All right, many thanks, Leila Milana Allen. We're gonna cut in because of the sound issues that we're having with Beirut. Apologies for that. Let me get a first reaction then from Ana Aoun. You just heard what Leila Milana Allen said about how the idea of coming up with a new cabinet within 48 hours seems like mission impossible. You agree?
Yes, 48 hours is most likely a mission impossible, especially that the resignation of the prime minister was a little bit a surprise in the sense that it wasn't coordinated with the president before and not with the other parties in the parliament, which means that any formation of new government will go through a process that will require some negotiations between the political parties represented or parliamentary blocs represented in the parliament, as well as the president of the republic, the speaker, which means that we need definitely more than 48 hours to define the kind of government that we'll have. Will it be a government with politicians, with technocrats, with independents? It's not clear, and also who will be the prime minister, because when the president of the republic will call for consultations, the MP will nominate their candidate for prime minister, and then the one who gets the majority will be nominated. So this also will require some talks with Mr. Hariri if he's again a new candidate for this position, or eventually if there's someone else who would be presented. So all these have to be answered in the coming hours, let's say couple of days, and things will become a little bit more clear about first who will be the prime minister, and then a process of negotiation.
The process of
the
negotiation.
nature of the government, and of course the names.
Let's just remind our viewers.
The negotiations.
Let's just remind our viewers at this point. Lebanon since 1990 has this system where the president has to be a Christian.
Excuse me, it's not since 1990.
It's even further. Yes.
Yes, it's with the born of Lebanon. It wasn't
43.
written, but this was
back when it was
system.
still a French protectorate.
Yes, it was after, and after the independence, we have the prime minister is a Sunnite, the chief of the parliament is Shiite, and the president of the republic is Christian Maronite.
All right. So your reaction, Anthony Khouri, from what you just heard from Ana Aoun, that this takes time. You've got to speak to all the parties. Will it be a government of technocrats? Will it be a government with all the political spectrum represented, as was the case up to now?
Well, my reaction to start with is just that this is the problem since the beginning, since she just said. We are not waiting for them anymore to do this. And this is the problem we're protesting against. This kind of system, this kind of government, this kind of sectarianism, this kind of discussions and who puts who comes who wants who, if Saad Hariri is going to come back, if he's come back, is Gibran Bassil inside or no? This is what we're protesting against, this system, these personalities. We do not care about personalities anymore. This is not what we're doing here. We're protesting against this government and against this system who's trying to push us back again and again in the same problems, in the same situations. And just like he said, I mean, we're still in this status quo.
So realistically, what can happen in 48 hours?
Nothing, maybe. Probably nothing.
So then what happens after that?
Well, we keep protesting first. Second of all, we prepare the independent government, a transitionary government, independent, responsible, and that knows what to do and how to deal with the situation today. A free government from outside proxies, a free government from inside proxies, because just like he said, the government today is not only like linked to the outside, but it's linked to their own people inside. So each leader has his own people, and that's what he's going to serve to. And this is why there's still these divisions between the government and the parliament. And so it's always about...
Just to be clear, who gets to decide who's representative in this independent government, as you call it?
The street.
How do you do that?
The street. There's a lot of organizations today. There's a lot of parties.
Because you'll need to have it ratified by Parliament, right? There'll be a vote of confidence.
Well, as an exceptionary transitional government, no. because only legitimacy is the street. So there's no legitimacy outside of the street.
Yeah, just to clarify some things, because you are seeing the things through a constitutional system, and Deputy Aoun is seeing the same thing. The people on the street today is not what they are asking. They are asking to put down all the leaders who are in power today. So they are asking to form a government from the people directly, which will be formed and which will be considered as a transitional government, because the people in the streets, the youth, we are the generation with the war. The youth are trying to make the peace, and perhaps are trying today to build a real Lebanon with one identity. So they are asking to form, and this was going to take some time. How is going to happen? Through perhaps a referendum or through other issues, to see how they can put in charge a government which will be a transition government until new elections
And how do you do
based
that?
on a parliament which will be secular, which is the constitution of Lebanon. This is what I'm trying to tell you, that there is a process that could happen like in all other countries in the world. You have, if you put a referendum in Switzerland, for example, this is what happened at a certain time, that you can put a referendum and you can choose the government directly from the people as a transition government. Because the people in the street doesn't trust today President Aoun, they doesn't trust Nabih Berri, they don't trust anymore Saad al-Hariri, and they don't trust all the political class which are in power today. So if the government, what Deputy Aoun is saying is totally constitutional, and he's totally right. This is how it happens. The president is supposed to
Under the current rules. But you're saying
Yes.
it's perhaps time to scrap the rules. Aoun, you agree that it's time to change the system?
It's not about
No,
scrapping the rules.
No,
Yes.
let me just answer all these concerns. Actually, of course, constitutionally, this is the only way to change the government unless we're going into a coup d'etat. So I guess that this is not the case. I said today, by the way, in a local interview, that for the first time, I know that the formation of this new government, this government after the crisis, is not a normal political process. I said there are two new players in forming the government, the street from one side, and the economical crisis that is also has all its weight on the crisis here. So we have to take all these concerns into consideration. It's not just a normal political process where we're choosing among the political parties and the parliamentary blocs. I know that, but at the same time, the protesters who are part of the Lebanese people, of course, but of course there are other also people who support the political parties today. No one can say that he has the exclusive support of all the Lebanese people. The protester has to be also realistic that any change has to go through the constitutional process. There is no other way, unless we're going into a coup d'etat, or we're going into a civil war, or we're going to any other sort of chaos or anarchy, which is not, I think, their intention, and this is not the intention of anyone. So the rule of the games are the following: we change the government now, and it has to be as much as possible a government that responds to the wish of lots of this revolution that just happened, in terms of inspiring confidence, in terms of people who are trustful, who are can make this positive shock for this country to jump again on its feet and try to go and defy all these economical challenges that are ahead of us. After all, what I understand that the political system is today has to be changed. This is a lesson. It has a big failure, but the change has to go through the institutions. Unfortunately,
Has to go through the institutions.
Has to go through lots of steps.
It's almost time for the break, so I want to cross to Nadim Houri, Executive Director at the Arab Reform Initiative, who's also in the Lebanese capital. Thanks for being with us here on France 24. You just heard Member of Parliament Aoun say, if you want to reform the system, you've got to do it within the letter of the law. Your thoughts on what's ahead now?
Definitely. And what the protesters have been wanting is to actually apply the Constitution. The problem is this country has been ruled by a political class that hasn't even respected
Nadim, I'm going to cut you off because we're having sound
Carolina.
issues with the connection. We'll try to have those fixed and cross back to you as soon as possible. Anthony Khoury.
Yes, first of all, to start with, the change is not out of the Constitution, it's constitutional first. Second of all, speaking
How is it
about...
constitutional?
We'll get to that. Speaking, because I need to comment on a couple of
Sure.
stuff that Alain said that are quite important. Speaking about coup d'etat is just manipulating the process of the protest today. There's no coup d'etat. And there's no state or government that is actually a state or government to throw down. So that's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is for them to take responsibility of their own faults and agree and go down that they failed and that this whole system failed. And speaking about constitution and institutions, and he said about normal things, I mean, having normal people, but that's normal. That's the people protesting. This is what's normal. The people here is not an abnormal thing that is added to the question. We were used to that, maybe, that it's the leaders that directs everything, and we can see that as not normal when the people get in, but that's actually the normal situation. It's the people deciding their own fate. And this is what's constitutional. This is the legitimacy. It's the people on the streets today.
You're changing what I said. This is not
I
what I
didn't.
said.
I did not.
No, you're changing the meaning of what I said. Let me tell you, I didn't say that it's not normal. I said we came out of parliamentary elections a year ago. Then there's a parliament, and I said the normal procedure to form a government is just a normal political process through the parliament and through the constitutional. What I said is that this crisis, no one can today go into and form a government without taking into consideration what happened. On the contrary, I'm acknowledging that no one can just close his eyes and say nothing happened in the street.
Nothing happened in the street. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to cut you off because we have to take a very quick break. We'll be right back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. Lebanon in the throes of 2 weeks of protests that have brought the nation to a standstill. The Prime Minister has tendered his resignation. A bit of a respite this Wednesday, but demonstrators have given those in power 48 hours to come up with a government of technocrats. With us to talk about it, activist Anthony Khoury. We're also in the company of Rima Tarabai, former advisor to the late Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri. Member of Parliament Alaoun of the Free Patriotic Movement is with us from Beirut. And so is Nadim Khoury, Executive Director of the Arab Reform Initiative. And the question we've been asking, if you're just joining us, is after these protests, which are unprecedented since 1990 at the end of the civil war in Lebanon, which established the current status quo, what next? Emerald Maxwell has more.
With the resignation of Saad Hariri's government, Lebanon is entering a period of uncertainty. To prevent a lengthy power vacuum, President Michel Aoun must now hold consultations with the heads of parliamentary blocs to ask them for their choice of a new prime minister. But the problem is that protesters adamantly reject the parties that make up parliament. They want a clean break from a political class they deem corrupt and a technocratic government that will guide the country through its economic crisis.
If they don't form the technocrat governments that we're calling for, we will block the roads again, believe me.
It often takes Lebanon's fractious political leaders months to agree on a prime minister. So the easiest compromise for President Michel Aoun would be to reappoint Saad Hariri to form a new government, though that might fail to quell the anger in the street. Alternatively, Aoun could decide to choose another candidate, with the support of powerful Shia group Hezbollah and its allies, who now make up the majority in parliament. But agreeing on the person for the job will be challenging. Not only will he or she have to be politically credible, but the sectarian Lebanese system also requires that the Prime Minister is Sunni. Protesters, though, are demanding an end to that setup. They want political leaders chosen without reference to their religious identities. Finally, the President himself hasn't been spared the protesters' anger either. But Michel Aoun has so far resisted calls to step down.
Nadim Khoury, would it be a good idea to now scrap the old system whereby you appoint people to important positions according to their confession, or according to their religion, according to their makeup in this patchwork that is Lebanon?
You know, the Taif agreement that ended the civil war stipulates that. It stipulates that there has to be a transition out of sectarianism, except the existing political class, most of which emerged from the civil war, has never done anything. So yes, definitely. The way to get there, of course, is going to be a long way, because sectarianism is not only today a political system, it has also become the economy of the country, with citizens' access to services dependent on the goodwill of their sectarian leaders. So the protesters here realize it's going to be a long way. But what they are saying is that this current system, it's not simply a sectarian system in the politics, it's a clientelistic system in the economy with monopolies along sectarian lines, is broken. It has to be changed fundamentally, and that the initial equation no longer works for them. So we know that the current system is in its dying days. We just don't know how it will be replaced and how to get there.
And you say dying days, but is that the case, really?
I'd say dead days already. Or like grieving days.
The idea, yes, it's definitely dead in the sense that people no longer trust it. Even those who may have voted in it a couple of years ago no longer trust it. Now, that doesn't mean that all political parties that are here today will cease to exist. Many of them have their base. But the current system, where basically 6 or 7 only men, mostly over the age of 50, decide the fate of the country and divide the spoils, is over. Frankly, for a very simple reason: the money is no longer there. There are more and more parties, more and more individuals trying to divide a cake that is shrinking. And it has led to Lebanon to an economic crisis. It has led Lebanon to a profound crisis on the environment. It has led Lebanon and the Lebanese to be poorer than they have ever been. The economic situation has been even more dire than during the, coming out of the war. Banks in Lebanon have never been closed for that many days, even in the midst of conflict. This is how bankrupt the system that this political class has built.
Rima Taraba, the banks might reopen Friday, they're saying, but that's not a certainty.
I don't know, but what's happening today is that the protester will stay on the ground, and we are in a crisis. But I think that being in this crisis is interesting, because we are going to try to reform the country as a whole. Now it's going to be a process. What Deputy Aoun is saying, just I want to notice this, that Deputy Aoun is first recognizing that this is a revolution, which I think it's important for the protester, that people in power know that there is a revolution happening in the street, and they are ready today to listen to what the people in the street are saying. This is why Prime Minister Hariri resigned. Now the protesters are asking for more, and which is the right of the Lebanese people, because we've been passing through decades of nepotism and all what's happening, and sectarian political sharing system. So there is also other ways. I don't know if Deputy Aoun, but I'm sure that he knows this, that if President Aoun, who was, before becoming a president of Lebanon, was one of the people who was claiming for a secular state when he was in Paris. So the other way to go through this crisis is, if they form again government, the parliament can be dismissed with the president and the chief of the government. This is the way to go out also. That like this, you dismiss the parliament and you ask for new election based on a secular government.
Well, you cannot go to a new elections in this logic without having a new electoral law. And who will do this new electoral law? It will be this actual parliament, actually.
Yes.
So, of course, maybe it's a process today that we have to set to build confidence again. That starts with a new government. But I think it's not only a question of names and not only a question of figures.
I would like to ask.
It's a question of many changes that has to be done in the coming period. in the way of in the governance, in the good governance, in maybe today voting for a new electoral law and making the next elections based on it, doing real reforms in order to bring Lebanon forward, anti-corruption laws, anti-corruption system, everything that would restore confidence in the state that is completely
lost.
But
how the government will be done
of
today?
course,
I don't understand. But Mr. Aoun, what I don't understand is how the president and whatever prime minister is going to be nominated will form a government without passing through a sectarian system, which means how is going to happen? We know today that the current government is half split between Christian and half split between Muslims. We know very well that
the minister... You cannot change it from a day to another.
So you mean that this government...
It changed already. It changed already.
So this government cannot exist. What the protesters are asking... will never be applied.
We have Anthony Houri saying the system is already dead. We have Alain Aoun saying that you need to that this has to follow methodical steps for
he said
it to
about
be orderly.
There's no confidence.
There's another precinct that needs.
It's a progressive change of the
progressive
system.
change is what you're saying. There's another precinct that's been heard from in the last few days that we should mention for our viewers. We saw a spike in tension on Tuesday. Supporters of Iran-backed Hezbollah, alongside the other Shia movement, Amal, which is the movement of Parliament Speaker Nabi Berri, going on what protesters described Tuesday as a rampage. Hezbollah, which was already on tenterhooks last week when its leader warned the street movement was being manipulated by forces, domestic and foreign.
I am scared for the country. We are scared for the country. We are scared that there might be someone who wants to take Lebanon and create social, security, and political tensions that could lead to civil war.
All right, so that was the reaction of the leader of Hezbollah. Do you take that as a friendly warning, a threat?
I just take that as them fearing the situation, just like the whole government.
But they have the weapons. They could trigger a civil war.
I would say these are fears from the old generation. We're not making any civil wars in the streets today. We will not make any civil war in the streets today. We're a secular, independent, civil movement that is going to stay as it is, and they're trying to delete secularism. Secularism does not exist anymore. It does exist, but in the streets and what we want, it doesn't exist anymore, and we're asking for that. The confidence in that government doesn't exist. It didn't exist. It was just trying to push and be pushed and be pushed and be pushed. There's no way to form confidence.
Nadim Houri, when you hear Hassan Nasrallah warn of the specter of civil war, what's your reaction?
My reaction is there will only be a civil war if these warlords decide there is a civil war. I was here in Martyr Square yesterday when the thugs that were sent by Amal and Hezbollah descended upon the square. All the protesters were completely pacifist. They stood aside. They were beaten up. They did not even seek to defend themselves. There was no act of aggression. So when we talk about civil war, who's going to fight who? The protesters don't have guns. The protesters have been peaceful from day one. And even when their encampments, the sit-in protest was attacked, they didn't, there was no violence from their behalf. This is really a sort of a threat. This political class, and I use the political class because this is what has been the slogan of these protests, have been using these excuses of violence and fear tactics to prevent reform, to prevent change for the last 3 decades. Every time that there's a protest, even in 2015 when the protest was about the garbage crisis, the environment, they say, well, if you push for change too much, we're going to have a civil war. They don't even bother explaining what's the scenario for civil war. No one wants to fight with Hezbollah. The irony is Hezbollah for years said that it was there to defend the marginalized, the downtrodden, the poor. And today it's presenting itself as the main defender of the interests of the oligarchy. We need to stop for a second and think about that. All right, what is Hezbollah defending today?
In fairness,
the interests of the billionaires
it's not just Hezbollah that's worried. Tuesday, when Hariri resigned, France's foreign minister was speaking during Parliament's question time. Let's listen to Jean-Yves Le Drian.
Lebanese Prime Minister Hariri resigned a few moments ago, which in a way makes the crisis even more serious. In this context, France has two convictions. The first is to do everything possible and to call on Lebanese authorities to do everything possible to guarantee the stability of institutions and the unity of Lebanon. This is essential.
You know, France was behind the confessional system which exists today in Lebanon because they wanted to protect the Christian at this time. So
the second message, by the way, from the foreign minister was
to listen to the population.
Listen to the people.
Yes, I know. But at the same time, they have their own interest also in Lebanon. So I think that today the Lebanese showed the world that they know better than anyone else what's best for Lebanon, you know. The thing is, in this
So Jean-Yves Le Drian is
revolution,
wrong to worry and to...
I think that Jean-Yves Le Drian is wrong to worry because today is a historical moment, what's happening today in Lebanon, and it's going to be a historic moment for the change to save Lebanon in a sustainable way. Because if we are going to continue with this sectarian system, Lebanon will not exist anymore. And I think people doesn't know what's going to happen after that. If we abolish the sectarian system, we will perhaps one day will have a hope for the existing of Lebanon for all the sects which exist today in Lebanon.
Anthony Houri, will all these outside players, not just Iran, which backs Hezbollah, but also Saudi Arabia, the United States, France, the West, etc. Will they all go away quietly if your movement gets its way?
They won't go away quietly, but those are the foreign powers, and if there's a strong state to act upon those foreign powers, we will act as a state, as a strong state, towards these foreign states in a political, discussionist, interest-based discussions, whereas now government from outside, they have their interests in the hands of the government today, which are not necessarily our interests as a population or as a country. So, and the fact that we don't have a state that is actually strong government that can have his own decisions and his own independence and freedom of deciding, of acting, of implementing reforms, well, the foreign states are going to keep on manipulating the government today. This is why we need a strong, independent, free state, free from, as I said, free from independent powers, but also inside
and
secular powers.
And Aoun, do you agree that there's no civil war to fear, there's no spike in violence to fear?
Yes, of course, I agree with that, and I guess that except these two regrettable and condemned events, and that we should condemn without any hesitation, I think all the protests went very peacefully, and there was no reason for any violence to happen, and and I think that this is something very good, and I hope we will keep it. That Lebanon will remain a democratic country where anyone can express and protest for anything, including toppling any government or toppling any system. So this is very good and has to be, of course, it's thanks to the army, thanks to the protesters themselves, and thanks also to this consciousness of the whole, of course, the responsibles also, political responsibles.
And as far as outside players, are they just going to go away?
Sorry?
Are outside players going to go away?
I didn't hear you.
Are foreign players going to go away, foreign backers of the various political parties?
Yeah, but it's not that easy. It's complex because Lebanon is a little bit correlated to the foreign powers, especially at least some political and main parties here in Lebanon on the scene. Maybe not all of them, and this is why it was always difficult to dissociate Lebanon from what's happening around. And this is one of the also problems of the system that we're living. But let's say that today, the crisis of today, at least, is really an internal crisis. It's due to social and economical reasons, and maybe for once it's not a question related to any regional problem or regional tension.
Not only economical.
Yeah, political. It's an internal
it's political. They are asking, the protesters are asking to have a secular state.
Purely political.
I mean, it's an internal reasons.
You know, the system.
Internal reason. Yeah.
I mean, it's not related to Iran or Saudi Arabia or any regional conflict, or it's really an internal conflict.
Lebanese. It's completely Lebanese.
Nadim Houri, let me ask you.
This is exactly what I was saying.
Nadim Houri, let me ask you. We've seen in Tripoli in the north, a Sunni stronghold, people cheering the resignation of Saad Hariri. We've seen protests in the south, a Hezbollah stronghold. How long will that continue, that honeymoon period that we've seen the last 2 weeks between north and south?
Look, I don't know how long it's going to continue, but I want to take the moment to enjoy it. It's a moment where Lebanese citizens are reclaiming their citizenship, and they are questioning each one in their own corner, their own sectarian leaders, and asking them, what have you done for me all these years? I cannot predict the future, but that moment is very important. That is the birth of active citizenship in this country, and we need to build on it. And to go back to your question about foreign powers, countries that care about Lebanon should cherish that moment and in a way shield Lebanon from foreign interference. It's complicated enough. Yes, this is a complicated country. Yes, we're going to have to do a lot of different changes, but let us work on this. This is an essential moment, and these countries. This is not about Saudi and Iran. This is not about U.S., France, or Syria. This is not about Israel. This is about the Lebanese wanting to have a decent government, wanting to feel represented, and they want dignity. They don't want their children to be swimming in a polluted sea, and the only way to do that is to start dismantling the sectarian system, which is not only sectarian in politics, but is inherently corrupt. And this is what 30 years of it has shown. There's no accountability in this country for anything, because no one can be held accountable because they are covered by their sectarian zaim, by their sectarian leader. And I think we need to enjoy that. I never thought, as a Lebanese, that I would see these protests in Tripoli against the Sunni leadership. I never dreamt of the day I would see those in Tyre and Nabatiyeh. So before, feeling, what are the odds of success, I just want to enjoy the moment because I feel it is the birth of something different.
The birth of something different.
I would just like to add something to what he said, and we know we are ready, we are confident, and we are responsible, and we know we are responsible and that we can do these changes without the help of the political leaders today, without any help of the political leaders today.
As I told you, it's a very historical moment today, and it's today where we can change things, because if we pass this historical moment, I don't know when people will go back in the street and ask for a secular system and a secular state. This is, for me, it is the only way to get Lebanon to stay as a country, because the system of secular country will end up, by letting people interfere from neighborhood, because we won't be anymore Christian or Shiite or Sunnite. We will be only Lebanese, as a citizenship as Lebanese. And at the same time, it will keep the faith that people can live in Lebanon even if there are minorities. Because today Christians are afraid to have perhaps a secular state. I'm not talking about the protester, but some of the political parties, Christian parties, are perhaps afraid of this. But this, on the contrary, will guarantee the existing of all communities in Lebanon if we come up with a secular government and a secular state, but it's going to take time, definitely.
Those outside players still loom large. Lebanon as a country where you right now have public debt, which is 150% of GDP, and there's always the sense that it's always hinging on aid from the outside world, because it is actually.
And we know how we got here, and we know who brought us here. It's the government today that's been going on for the last 30, 40, 50 years.
And if I can say something?
I know you have to leave us early, Alain Aoun. At this point in time, would it be a good idea for a snap general election? Will that solve the problem?
we'll have to see, because the new election with the actual law, well, I don't think it responds to the aspirations of those who protested. So actually it has to be through a new law, and a new law is something that has to also be discussed and negotiated and agreed by most of the political or political parties and parliamentary blocs to reach it, because this is how you change an electoral law. It's through the parliament. So this is something that is very complicated and complex, and has to go through a minimum of negotiations between everyone. And I guess that any new elections, if it really wants to answer all these ambitions that your guests are raising, I think they have to be through a new electoral law, which is not yet in our hands. That has to be discussed and has to be voted.
Alaoun, many thanks. Anthony Houri, a new electoral law that...
No, that's true. This is why we're not demanding right now elections. The point today and tomorrow and for the first period, it's not elections, is to form this civil, secular government who will take this transition and try to help the country and reform the country through the priorities, through the crisis today, to let go, to release the crisis a bit and try to prepare for a better country, for a better election law, for a new era of Lebanon and elections. So the point today, and not what are we working on today, we're not demanding that, we're just working on it, is the new government, is a small government that will prepare for the next period of Lebanon.
Nadim Houri, the situation in Lebanon is, of course, different from what's unfolding right now in Iraq. There, too, they're angry at outside players. There, too, they're angry at all of the political establishment, though. Can we connect the dots?
Of course, while the context is different, the underlying theme is the same. Citizens in more and more Arab countries are just fed up of being ruled by corrupt leaders. There's also a generational factor. There's a new generation coming up, between ages of 18 to 25, and they have not signed up for this. And they are making their entry in protest movements from Tunisia to Lebanon to Iraq. And the sectarian model that the U.S., frankly, has imposed on Iraq after 2003, which in some ways divides allegiances along Sunni, Shia, Kurdish lines, a bit like the Lebanese model, which has 18 communities, is failing. Iraq is supposed to be a rich country, and now they're turning it into a country that has to beg for international support. This is a country that has oil, that has water, that has human resources, and they're being depleted. And so there is a common theme, and what started with the call for dignity, for freedom in 2011 in the Arab world has not ended yet. In some cases, it has led to tragedies and wars, but I think that fundamental thirst for dignity is very, very strong, and this desire of people in the region to actually be citizens again. And I think we need to respect that. Clearly in Iraq, the level of violence against the protesters, overshadows what is going on in Lebanon. And in a way, what we're seeing in Lebanon as well is the evolution of the protest movement over many, many years. And it's almost with each round, the level of political awareness is increasing. So there are some differences. And there's definitely been a learning curve that has led us to this moment, and it's building up. One can only hope and wish that Iraq will also become more peaceful, and that the Iraqi authorities will hear what Iraqi protesters have to say.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Nadim Houri, I want to thank you for joining us from Beirut. I want to thank Rima Tarabai. I want to thank as well Anthony Houri and Alaoun. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.